This is Andy Biggio, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Scott, tell me why we have Andy Biggio on the show today.
Well, Andy's a dear friend of mine, and he's got an amazing book coming out June 1st called The Rifle, and I can't wait. I was happy to meet Andy years ago and then become, help him with this project. I want to turn it over to Andy so he can talk about his book.
Before we go any further, let me just say this because this is the kind of crazy-ass world we live in today. The rifle that's behind Andy's head is an artifact. It is not, this is a piece of history. This is not a display of a rifle, because that gets people upset on YouTube and everything. So, but yeah, talk about your incredible story, Andy.
Well, basically, it starts 77 years ago during World War II. I had my grandfather's brother, who I'm named after. So the first Andy Biggio was unfortunately killed in action during World War II. And having done 2 deployments myself as a Marine and coming home, I'd always, drive past his memorial square in our town called Andrew Biggio Square. So in a way, I may have not have had like this, crazy bloody deployment where I lost a true friend, but my survivor's guilt honestly came from seeing like my own name on a memorial square. That poor 19-year-old Andrew Biggio from 75 years before. And I wanted to dig in to find out what happened to that Andrew Biggio that didn't happen to me.
And so what did you do?
So basically, I heard my grandmother had kept all of his letters he wrote home before he was killed in Italy, fighting as an infantryman in the hilly terrain over there. And I started to go through his letters, and one of the first letters I read was him writing home to his mother from basic training on how much he enjoyed shooting the M1 Garand. And like right then and there, I couldn't even get through the next letters. I had to go out and purchase an M1 Garand. And so coming home with this new rifle, I'm showing the family, I'm aiming in, I'm holding it to my shoulder and, playing G.I. Joe. And the family thought I was cool, but they just viewed it as a gun. And I'm trying to say, no, this is what Andy held, before he died. And this is what he trained with. And it's, I wanted to feel what he felt. And I couldn't do that with just my regular family. So then I decided to take it to a nearby World War II veteran. And that World War II veteran ended up being Joe Drago, who was a U.S. Marine, served the 6th Marine Division on Okinawa. And he was about 91 when I put this rifle into his hands. And being 91, naturally, you're in the decline of life. So he would sit in his recliner every day. His legs had, atrophied into being very skinny. He wasn't getting out and getting exercise enough, and he was very weak and frail. And when I put this rifle into his hands, it was like he was 19 years old again. He started waving it around, aiming in. I had to duck because he was swinging it around, and the smile he had from ear to ear. And I said, we dive right into the Battle of Okinawa, and I'm there for hours listening to the Battle of Okinawa. And it's crazy because as a Marine, you thought I would know all of this stuff about the Battle of Okinawa, but you really don't. While you're in your own service, you just want to, complete your own service, get home alive, and you could care less about some tiny island somewhere, and that's in my experience and a lot of other young Marines' experiences I've met, who I've educated. But anyways, I said before I left his house, I asked him to sign my rifle, which he didn't want to do because he said it was such a beautiful weapon. But I had him sign it, and I remember walking out of his front door, looking at his signature, and I said, God, I need to get as many signatures on this rifle as possible and hear as many stories as possible. And thus sparked a 5-year journey.
During this journey, you're grabbing guys that are at the end of life. I imagine many of them have passed on after they signed your rifle. How are you still collecting signatures? And then what is the ratio in terms of how many you've lost? Like, if you don't get them, nobody gets them at this point.
I have a solid 197 names on this rifle, and I will be at 200 before June 1st. Half of them are gone. And then, so let's just say 100 are alive, but probably 70 are ambulatory,
Yeah.
And even from our trip we did 2 years ago, where we brought 16 of them back to Belgium, where they fought during the Battle of the Bulge, half of that group can't even leave the house anymore. They've gone that deal, and some of them, one of them has passed away. So we really are. This is it. This is the last of the Mohegans. We are. If you're gonna learn about World War II, you better do it now while they're still alive, because we are on borrowed time. The youngest World War II veteran now that has seen combat in World War II is 95. Wow. Okay, 95, average 95. That's the youngest you can be. So the oldest man on that rifle is 105.
It's incredible that you built this time machine. You know, you're taking these guys back. How clear are their memories? Because, you know, I've interviewed some guys who are in their 90s, and they all want to talk about it, but not all of them have the capability of recalling and putting things in the right sequence.
Right. So, I mean, the guy who's 105, he's a freak of nature. A freak of nature. I don't have to repeat myself to him. He can hear me clearly. He can tell me the day he landed on Omaha Beach, the day they liberated Germany. You know, that's most of the men I've interviewed or talked to have had signed the rifle. You know, 99%, 98% of them had a clear memory, could tell me stuff. There were a few who the family prepared me. Listen, he has dementia. And I said, that's okay. I know his background. I see his DD-214. I got to have his signature.
Yeah. So these guys give you their signature, and they tell you their story. And are you recording this live? Like, are you getting video? And do you have like an archive?
Yeah. So when I first started off, I want to say the first 15 signatures, I was too afraid to put a camera or record the veterans. I felt like I was being intrusive and invading their privacy. And I come from a generation, with an exception of Scott, we come from a generation where, you know, if you talk about it, you're a pussy. If you get in front of the camera, you're a glory hound, honestly. So I went into this project with that same mindset as these World War II veterans have agreed to sign my rifle. They didn't agree for me to set up a tripod, stick a camera in their face in their dying days of living in their house. So I was too shy to ask. So I would simply just snap a photo with my iPhone. Then I said, I gotta go in reverse and get these guys' stories. Their signatures on the rifle's great, but I started to realize when their family members came up to me, their kids, okay? Their kids who are now in their 60s. Wow, Dad never mentioned that before. Dad never told that story. And I said, wow, the rifle's really bringing out these stories. I got to record this. And so now I do. Now I have thousands of hours of video, audio. I started off just using a regular iPhone. Now I have a full Canon camera that I set up. And I'm slow, you know, I'll put little clips and teasers on my Instagram page, but more than likely I'm just going to upload it all to YouTube eventually.
And then are you also grabbing some of these Korean War veterans? Because they're often the same age. I mean, they're just, you know, they're out there and they fired the same weapon. Or are you waiting on that for another project?
No, you know, my father taught me at a young age, I can't be a jack of all trades and a master at none. So I'm really just focusing on World War II, and it's not, obviously, I think Korean War veterans are badass heroes. They fought one of the toughest wars in human history. Unfortunately, I can't, if I start doing that, I'm going to confuse dates, battles, times, things. So I need to focus on World War II while we have them, and then we'll see where we go after this project's complete, you know.
The rifle's available for pre-sale right now. It comes out next week. And so if you guys go to Amazon, there's a link right there at the bottom of the page. You can grab the rifle now in pre-sales. Basically what you're going to get is each one of these stories, these vignettes of these old-time guys from the World War II era, and then what they did. We had a guy, and I listened to the episode last night as I prepped for this. We had a guy on the show, Jim DeFelice wrote his biography with him. And his name's Henry Longrare, and he's still around. He jumps into Normandy. And you know, like the Longest Day, the D-Day movie, where Red Buttons is hanging from the steeple. He's one of the guys that is running by that guy in real life, like actually did it. And there are so many instances where he's like, And then luck rolled the dice for me, and I didn't die. He fought through the hedgerows. He escaped a Nazi death camp, like a work camp, and just over and over again, he's like, and then I got lucky, and then I got lucky, and he's still with us. I would love to have you sit down with him too and capture his story, because it's
What state is he in?
Iowa.
Okay, and he's 82nd Airborne or 101st.
Yeah, I think he's 82nd, I believe,
okay.
But he might be 101st. But I think he's 82nd. But yeah, just incredible, and I can link you guys together. But by doing this and having this rifle in their hands, it's incredible that you're able to get their brain activated. Is it pretty universal that once they grab that rifle, they get it and they start going?
Yes, and it's funny because I'm trying to represent the whole war on the rifle, right? So you have your infantrymen who grab it from you right away. They slap it into their palms and they start telling me. Then I have the airmen and the air crew from the B-17s who kind of just hold it peculiarly because the last time they held it was in basic. Then after that, they were in the air and they were a ball turret gunner or they were a pilot, and that was the last time I see the M1. But the whole purpose is to represent the whole war, regardless if they were a truck driver, a ball turret gunner in a B-17, or a grunt, an infantryman.
Yeah. Another guy we had on the show is he's one of the survivors of the USS Indy sinking, and he was in combat for, they leave Vallejo, California, go into the Golden Gate Bridge, and they deliver the atomic bomb, out in Guam and everything, and they break the record for getting there the fastest ever in a ship. And then the next thing you know, he's like, I'm taking a nap on the deck because it's too hot to be, below decks. And then I'm in the ocean,
Right.
And so he didn't even really get to do his job much in combat because they just happened to, that time they rolled the dice. But it is crazy. There's all these different realities. And you couldn't say he wasn't in combat because he was, his ship was in combat. It's crazy. All of these.
You're missing one guy. You're missing one guy that we haven't talked about, Chet Roan, who's a friend of all of ours. And
yeah, I love to talk about Chet.
He's been on the Break It Down show. He is I don't even know how old Chet is now, but it's amazing that Andrew told this story for all of these, and they're not, none of them would consider themselves heroes. They were just young men at the time. And what's remarkable is you've got a guy like Andrew who is a combat veteran in his own right. He knows war, and he wrote this amazing account of these guys' stories because it's been 60, 70 years in some cases, and their stories have never been told. So this book is this fascinating and once in a lifetime opportunity to have the everyday soldier and airman have their stories told. And I think that, why did they have to wait so long? Why do these young men and women who serve wait decades before someone picks this up? And there's still a huge fascination around World War II because they got a really cool nickname, right? The Greatest Generation. We've got some crappy nicknames for our generations, but nonetheless, the rifle, it was amazing when Andrew told me about this book. When I came out to visit him, it was probably 3 years ago. And he's like, yeah, I'm writing a book. And, he's a Boston cop and he's telling me all this. I'm like, yeah, right. Yeah, I get it. Everyone's writing a book. But he did. He shared it with me, and it's, as he's developing it, as he's building the stories. And I was like, wow, man, this book has to be read by everybody. So it's remarkable. And there's a lot of other interesting things when you talk about the rifle itself, the unique nature and all the signatures on it. Andy, tell everybody about some of the other fascinating signatures that you got on, like the tuba player, or because that was one of the questions I asked him was, hey, do you have any guys that should not have signed the rifle? Tell them about it.
Yeah, I had, it's amazing that, stolen valor isn't just something that's new. Basically, I've had several guys really embellish or completely lie about their service and sign the rifle because I didn't do my own due diligence and research them. This project started to gain traction, and on social media I would get messages, oh, you got to come meet my neighbor, you got to come meet my great uncle Tommy, he was in World War II, he did this, he did that, he was in the Battle of the Bulge. And I would just go, yeah, sure. And I run up to them and have them sign the rifle. And I had one gentleman, he was kind of young, and he was probably like 91, and I'm like, all right, well, you should be about 94 right now if you actually did fight in World War II. But either way, he signs the rifle. I ask him what division he's with. And this is a huge thing, because even with dementia or Alzheimer's, these guys, these World War II veterans, can somehow still tell you what division.
Yeah, they know their outfit.
They never forget it. It's like their own name. So anywho, this guy is like, I'm like, oh, what division you with? And he's like, oh, the 28th. Like question, just kind of guessing. So he signs the rifle, tells me he was in the Battle of the Bulge, and that he was shot and all this stuff. And I went to the local town hall to find out who he was, because I thought maybe I could provide him some more services. And I pulled his records, and he joined in 1948 and was in the Army band as a tuba player. So I'm like, oh God, here I go breaking out the paint thinner again to try to scrub the name off the rifle. So, and I've had other guys tell me, they're B-17 nose gunners, and we're in this battle and that battle. And then I pull the rosters of that squadron, and they were just mechanics in England who never left. There's no point of calling them out at that age and embarrassing them or their family. So I just take the name off the rifle, and that's the last they hear of me. So,
stolen valor still exists. But
you
can we
think?
Yeah,
you got to. 16 million men and women earned the World War II Victory Medal, right?
Right.
So that's 16 million technically World War II veterans. Who the hell didn't want to be the person who didn't see combat?
Right.
Especially the most popular, greatest war of all time. So
I want to tell that Chet Roan story. We were talking off mic about it, but it's so improbable and impossible. So just for everybody, and the link for that episode is right here below. I'm watching on YouTube. You can always go to YouTube. You can always support the show there. And if you want to support the show further than that, go to the Break It Down Show page, breakitdownshow.com. Hit the PayPal link. Throw a little bit of money in there. Whether it's $5, like, would you buy me a beer? Do that. Do that amount. Would you buy me lunch? Do that amount. And then every month that goes in, and I'll invest that into the show and make sure that the show is growing and getting fed ads and trips, that kind of thing that keep us afloat. All right. So
Pete, what can I tag on Instagram to show I'm live right now?
Do youtube.com/c/Pete Turner.
Okay.
And then that'll let them see it. The thing I wanted to ask, so I'll tell part of the Chet Roan story while you're doing that. So my buddy Mike lives in Dallas, and I said, hey, I'm coming out. Who should I grab for the show? And he's like, oh man, my friends at my church, their dad is a World War II veteran, and he fought at the Battle of the Bulge. And I'm like, oh, that's perfect. I'd love to grab this guy. And so we and I meet Chet, and we have this great conversation, and we hold on to all of his stuff, and he's got like this little mini Chet museum from his time, in the Battle of the Bulge, and he drove a half track. So basically, they land on Normandy, and then a couple of days later, he's pushing forward or whatever, and actually, it's actually weeks later, he's pushing forward, and he ends up at the Battle of the Bulge, one of the hardest fights, and cold and miserable and all that kind of stuff, and then ultimately helps liberate these concentration camps, and he just tells his story, and it's incredible. And then I find out about Andy's book, and I call Andy, and I'm like, hey, no one's got this guy going back to Europe for the 75th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge. Here's a guy that was there. Can he go? And then Andy, you can take the story over from there.
Yeah, first off, the armored divisions are held close to my heart, because I wrote about a chapter called 18 Hours, which is about the 10th Armored Division in Bastogne, who were there before the 101st Airborne got there. But armored divisions do not get the credit they should, because most of them have disbanded since World War II. So we had a gentleman on our tour or on our trip. His name was John McAuliffe, and he was with the 87th Infantry Division, and he had started dialysis before the trip, and unfortunately decided to stop dialysis, and it was his time to leave Earth on his own accord. So with the spot open on the trip, I said, shit, let's get Chet Roan on here. We can have somebody represent the 11th Armored Division at the 75th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge, and we had him and his grandson come on our trip, all expenses paid. And Chet got to show us and teach us certain things of where his division was over there in Belgium. It was awesome. And rest in peace to John McAuliffe, but it gave birth to another veteran to be able to come with us overseas.
It felt so good too, because when I asked him, I said, "Are you going for the 75th?" He's like, "I'm not invited. No one knows me." And I'm like, "Let me see if I can fix that." And then we did fix it, you know. And I love seeing the pictures of him standing there with his jacket on. And Scott, you got to talk to Chet. Tell your part of the story. Oh, I think I got Scott muted. All right, sorry. Tell your part of the story.
Yeah, I didn't even know Chet was going on the trip. I knew he was on your show, and then I actually sat right in front of him on the bus as we're driving all of these 16 of World War II vets from the Battle of Bastogne and the Battle of the Bulge, and just a fascinating guy. I mean, the connection too that I'm always talking about is so very few degrees of separation. How I met Andy, how I met you, and then he was even on the show when you were down there in Dallas to interview him. But it was just interesting to talk to him and his grandson, who was escorting him on the trip, and just pull back a few more layers of his battle at such a young age and what he did, and just to have that connection, I think it's just really something special. I mean, I've thanked Andy a million times for making me a part of that trip, because it was historic, and those were some opportunities where 16 guys, we didn't stop for a break. They were on the bus, off the bus. We had like a wheelchair platoon and a walker platoon, and they were able to, some of them for the first time ever, go back and see the actual fighting holes where they carried that rifle, where they were engaged with the Nazi and German forces of World War II. It was riveting to me to be a part of that and to see the expression on their faces and hear the details. And some of the guys were really quiet, and it really took a little warming up, and then they kind of share. It was really remarkable. And one of the questions I always ask them was, is this the first time you've been back, or is this the first time your story's been told? And for the most part, all of them said yes. And that's due in large part to Andy writing this book, The Rifle, which is, again, it comes out June 1st. Pre-order it. Andy, grab that book behind you, man, and hold it up so everyone knows what the cover looks like. It's on Amazon right now. If you're watching this right now, go to Amazon and click on The Rifle, type in The Rifle, and get a copy right now, because I'm telling you, this is an amazing story. It's an amazing book of stories, which is something that most people just want to hear about one person, but this is like this anthology of not just the war, but so many deep, personal, intimate stories. And the way Andy tells that it's very unique. Andy's got I'll brag on him a little bit, because he's got this unique nature of relating with these World War II veterans who, for all intents and purposes, could be his grandfather, great grandfather in most cases, but he treats them with respect, but also that jocularity and familiarity of being a fellow Marine or soldier and busting their balls, and they give it right back. And I think that watching that interaction between all of the people Andy interviewed and how they shared their stories is one thing for a person that writes a book about someone else's story, and that's trust. So these people trusted Andy to share their story, and I'm always in marvel of his unique style on how he does that. And another famous national treasure that's been on the show that we all know wrote the foreword to this book, and that's Herschel Woody Williams. Yeah, a Medal of Honor recipient. He's the last living Medal of Honor recipient of World War II, and he wrote the foreword to The Rifle. And I was just in Keller, Texas 2 weeks ago, and Woody signed a M1 SOCOM16 for our nonprofit, SaveTheBrave.org, and the Herschel Woody Williams Foundation. That whole thing was, that whole idea through BlackstoneOrange.com came from Andy. When we did another rifle this year, I was like, hey, let's kind of do what Andy did, get an M1, but make it this cool, sexy M1. And, Andy was the catalyst to that, because he was at Andy's, when I met Andy for the first time, he was one of the speakers in Boston at the Boston Wounded Vet Run, which Andy also is the founder of. He doesn't just sit around all day eating bonbons. He's a writer. He's a historian. I tease him. He likes to play a caveman on TV as a Boston cop, but he's got a master's degree in history. He knows what he's talking about. He knows what he's writing about. He's got firsthand experience, and he runs a nonprofit. He's always given back, and I think that speaks to his talent as a historian and as someone that cares about these stories he's told in the rifle. It's just remarkable. There's no real question in that for Andy, but I think the question really is how important was it to you that you got it right?
Very, very, very important, because I'm not just making up a fictional book here. I'm playing with people's legacies, people's lives, people's stories. They've trusted me to tell their story. And I've actually already found a couple of minor errors in my own book, and Scott warned me of that. That's what's going to happen. But luckily, that's why we make second editions, or why we, we reprint copies, so, and you got to think, not to mention, boy, am I not the first person to write a book about World War II. Okay. There's been millions of books written about World War II. I'm not the first person to tell it. And you're going into a world and into a community where people have given the same battlefield tours. People have written books about specific divisions. People have been researching and talking to World War II veterans when they had their wits in their ages of their 50s or 60s or 50s. I'm meeting them in their 90s. So it was very hard for me to corroborate information that was being told to me 75 years later than what was written. But I chose the men who could tell the stories the best, cooperated with other survivors of those divisions, and after action reports and so on and so forth. But the thing is, I look at my book not as, I'm certainly a historian, but I'm not telling division history here on where the division was, whether they were 10 miles east of a certain town or 8 miles west of a certain town or a certain town. I'm telling a veteran. I'm being a veteran's advocate here, telling their story and their contribution to the Second World War, which is so important, especially if they've never told it. And it gives a different aspect. And I wanted to tell it right, so especially I think the hardest part is writing about the Pacific, because you're trying to come up with names of hills that are in Japanese, names of rivers in Japanese, and it's a very complicated thing to write about when you're talking about records that weren't kept well to begin with in the 1940s. I have veterans tell me like specific details. No, I don't care what that book you're looking at says. That's wrong. I know what happened that day. I know what the division did. I know when this person died and how he died, because there was guys that got killed and they couldn't get evacuated until days later. And then when the medics have them, they say, okay, the guy was killed on September 18th. When I have survivors who say, no, he was shot down the 15th. We couldn't get him off that hill in Italy. And that's when he died. So I am, getting it right is important for their legacies, and because, the historians who haven't sold many books are going to come after me in the Amazon reviews. So that's what I'm, there's a two-pronged reason why I have to get it right. I'm not the first guy to write it.
Yeah, you're not the first guy to get it right. And that spoken history is important. Like you said, the guys that did it on the ground might have a very specific memory, and maybe that unlocks something, an error. Look, in our lifetimes, Hack Wilson, who's been dead for 50 years, picked up an RBI. This is a sport in baseball where they track everything to the nth degree, and they're like, oh, by the way, extra. It's like they update the record all the time because some other piece of evidence comes out. And so, yeah, it's great to get this spoken word history. It's how we do history in a lot of ways. And just because you've written something first, I mean, how many times did somebody who wasn't in that half track forward deployed at the tip of that column? How many times did the guy who was back in London, write the history of that unit, not knowing that, no, we did make a left turn that day because of X. And then we got into a firefight. And that's where, whatever that person did, whatever it was.
That's why I think myself as a veteran, which I don't boast on enough, but I understand that not everything that happens in a fire team is reported to the squad leader. Not everything that happens in a squad is reported to the platoon. Not everything that happens in the platoon is reported to the company. You still have to go and talk to the people. The first-hand accounts were there. There's a lot of World War II authors and historians who've never even talked to a World War II veteran. They just do research and write a book. I don't get that. I don't understand how that even works. I had a Nelson Bryant was a 82nd Airborne veteran of the 508th D Company. He jumped into Normandy. A few days later on a patrol, he was shot through the chest and was evacuated to England eventually. When September, he's in a chest trauma ward in Wales, I think, England, in a hospital. I don't quote me on the town, but he was in a hospital recovering from the wound. And he finds out the 82nd Airborne is going to make a jump into Holland in September for Operation Market Garden, and the doctor's like, absolutely not. You cannot go rejoin the unit. So he bails. He leaves without permission.
Love it.
And goes. He can't even close. He's so weak from being in rehab. He can't even close his parachute harness. 2 other paratroopers have to buckle it for him. They give him an M1 carbine because he couldn't even lift the M1 Garand, and they throw him out of the plane over Holland. And I wrote on an Instagram post, Nelson Bryant went AWOL from the hospital. And of course, some other researcher chimed in, there is no official documents that claims that he went AWOL. There is nothing in the morning reports. There is no court martialing. I'm like, oh boy, you really don't, you never served in the military. Yeah. Okay. At that time, the doctors couldn't control the soldiers. They're not going to court-martial people. They're not going to put it on paper that he went AWOL. He left without permission. I totally believe it.
Yeah, and went on a combat jump.
The reason why I totally believe it, and I know it's true, is because A, he was shot. His exit wound hadn't even healed in his back by September. And his bayonet was returned to him 73 years later after it was found in a field in Holland. Why was it in a field in Holland? He was too weak to unbuckle himself. He cut himself out of it and left it and went on. Okay, the story is 100,000% true. And still, you got the people who haven't visited and interviewed over 200 veterans, but they read an after-action report or a morning report from 75 years ago during the Battle of Normandy. Yeah, because those are very accurate. So
let me lend some weight to that story because we've had Jerome Preissler on. Jerome wrote the book about the actual Dirty Dozen, the Nasty 13, and they were run by this Sergeant First Class. They called him McNasty, and these guys jump into the Battle of the Bulge, and they weren't going to be able to go in because weather wasn't going to allow it. And then God works in his weird ways, and it's like, here's some clear air. And so McNasty and his boys get into this airplane. And they're like, okay, listen, when you guys jump, if it's too close and it's too dangerous, pop, black smoke and we'll, peel off. And if everything's all good, pop orange smoke and we'll start dropping supplies in. And so McNasty only takes orange smoke and lands within 100 feet of a German tank when he drops in. And he's like, pop! And then, orange smoke everywhere because that was how dedicated these guys are. There's no way you're not turning this. If you turn this thing around, we're going to jump out anyhow. So you may as well just take us to where we want to go. They insisted on being dropped into the, because that's part of the reason why the Battle of the Bulge went our way was because these airplanes were finally able to get some supplies in. And so when you talk about your guy jumping, I believe it because all of the and these guys were the Pathfinders. This is for the audience. And I'll put the link for the episode in there. These guys jumped in before the 82nd Airborne to turn on the light and say, jump here, jump here, jump here. So these guys were the ones who went the first, right? And they were all known to be one-way missions. and they kept going, and they would survive somehow and get on the next airplane, and they would jump in again. And so all of these early combat jumps had these pathfinders going ahead of them, and they were desperate to do this job. It was what they were made for. They picked the right guys. They were all psychopaths who were like, it's not about me, it's about these guys have to know where to go. And
My
you're 100%
biggest
right.
Yeah, my biggest fear is that when the World War II veterans are nearly gone or gone, that people are going to try to write their own history, and it's gonna piss me off, and you already see it kind of happening. But
what year do you think that will be? What year is that projected that the last World War II vet?
they say the last World War II veteran, okay, will be dead in 2041 at the age of 117.
Wow.
Americans, American World War II.
Yep.
Because you got to remember, the Allied forces, around the world were all, it was a world war. We had people from. Are there other countries that you've stumbled across in your research, like the UK? Like they have no more World War II vets.
No, because you were, there were these, certain examples when these freaks that were 14 years old who looked like they were 20 snuck in. Russia was definitely marching into Berlin with 15 and 14-year-old kids. The Germans who defended Berlin were putting helmets on 13-year-olds. So these guys are all can be considered World War II. But we're
go ahead.
We're going on between medical advancements and technology. The last American World War II veteran who could have seen combat is projected to die at the age of 117 in the year 2040 or 2041, I believe it is. That's what they projected to be. Frank Buckles was America's last World War I veteran, and he died, I believe he was 108, and he died in 2011.
Wow. And the last Civil War veteran wife just died recently too. These things go on for a long time.
Well, you mentioned the Germans, and one of the unique events that took place in Belgium during the Battle of the Bulge in Bastogne was, I think it was Bob Weber, 10th Armored. Who did he get to meet?
You were broken up there, Scott.
I said one of the very, very interesting events that you mentioned was talking about the age of the Germans, and I believe in Bastogne when we went back, I think it was Bob Weber. Who did he get to sit down and meet?
So it's in my book. Frank Buckles was 110 when he died in West Virginia. He was the last World War I veteran, not 108. Bob Weber, no, it was Wayne Field met Jurgen Tegetov, and Wayne Field was with 6th Armored Division. That's what you're talking about when he met the King Tiger tank commander. Yeah. And that King Tiger tank commander is about 96 years old, so he was the average age of an 18-year-old who enlisted that time. And for those, it's just incredible. A lot of people, besides on my own Facebook, and if you've seen our documentary, if you YouTube 75th anniversary Battle of the Bulge, you'll see a King Tiger tank commander have the courage to walk into a room full of 16 American victors, the winners of the war, and shake their hands and make peace with them after such a long time.
Yeah, that's a remarkable thing to be able to do that. Get that interaction between these guys and kind of close the loop for that. The book is called, let me put the link up here for the book. The book is called The Rifle. It's available in pre-sales right now. It will be out next week officially, and so you can get that. If anyone is typing, please stop. It's loud, and I can't cycle it out. The Rifle, right there. There's the link. The Amazon link. Get that. That'll support us. I don't know. It just sounds like typing. I can't make it go away. What did you learn along the way, Andy?
What did I learn? I learned, I went into this, and to us as younger veterans, we view the World War II veterans as gods, like we do. They are the bee's knees. They are the greatest generation. We grew up as young kids watching the movies and the reruns and the clips of World War II and saying, I want to be that badass. And what I learned is that they were just extraordinary men during extraordinary times. They're not a whole lot, and I hear a lot of people bitch and moan and complain and say, oh, you know, they don't make men like that anymore. And oh boy, weren't they something else? And those statements are true to a point. But like I said, they were just men put in extraordinary circumstances who did extraordinary things. Because when I interview them and I meet them, I'm meeting men that are no different than me, no different than Scott, who volunteered to go and join after 9/11 happened. That was our Pearl Harbor. And these men from 1940s were given no training at all and just given a rifle and sent overseas. And the difference is they got to do what they wanted to do in order to win. Okay, if that meant carpet bombing whole friggin' cities, if that meant chopping a Japanese soldier's head off and strapping it to the front of your Jeep and driving around with it for intimidation, you know, they got to do whatever the hell they wanted because the media was on the side, the news was on the side, the world was on their side. We don't have that luck and that misfortune, that fortune to, I guess I wouldn't call it fortune because committing war crimes isn't a fortune, but you know, I met Marines who thought it was World War II Marines who thought it was a joke that our Marines got in trouble for urinating on dead Taliban corpses. They thought that was a joke. They used to take the teeth out of the Japanese heads. They used to, like I said, put their skulls on pikes out inside division headquarters. They did extreme warfare and brutal warfare in order to win. And that's a big difference I see. And, you know, we refer to them as the greatest generation, and they are, but I want the younger veterans to open this book and see that they were no different than you, and they were human, and look at them as that way as well.
When you talk to them about how they see the modern forms of combat, I know I asked Chad about this, and he's like, I couldn't imagine doing what you guys did. You know, and it shocks me because our fight is not what their fight was, and we can't imagine doing what they did. But
I get that. I got that comment a lot, like, "Ooh, Iraq, Afghanistan. Oh, I wouldn't want to be over there," you know. And they view it. They see it as if you not knowing who your enemy is that's crazy. How do you fight a war like that? For Iraq, Afghanistan vets, when your enemy's not wearing uniforms, how the hell could you possibly win or fight a war like that? And they go like, I'm glad I wasn't in that war. Well, Jesus, I'm glad I wasn't in the Battle of the Bulge getting shelled by German 88s, so.
Yeah, I was actually reading, like I said, I was reading Henry's book again last night, and he talked about the 88. Like one of the first things he talked about was, that they were terrifying. What stories stand out? Who just makes you shake your head from all those 200 dudes that are on your rifle?
Well, I had to pick 22 of them to make the book. And then I have more who I've added since the book, who I said, geez, if I had met you 5 years ago, you would certainly be in my book. I think I'm going to talk about right now Clarence Cormier, who was with the 106th Division. And his division is also called the Golden Lions. And they weren't even in Europe for 2 weeks before nearly half the division had to surrender. It was one of the biggest surrenders since the American Civil War. And Clarence was one of those men. And he was not put in a German prison camp. He was on a forced march through Europe. It was basically the Bataan Death March of Germany. So first off, to add insult to injury, after he had surrendered, they put him in box cars, like with cattle. Like there was still like cattle dung and hay and on the floor of these box cars, and they're squished in there, nut to butt, cannot move. And the Germans start sending the train to Germany. Well, there's a few American, P-51 Mustang pilots in the air, and they see a big juicy German train. So what do you think they do? They start strafing the fucking train And these poor guys, these Americans who were squished in there nut to butt, are getting murdered by their own air power. You know, they had to. It wasn't until like one of the Germans got out, released the doors, and the Americans were able to get out and with their human bodies form the word POW to stop the strafing. And he told me that story, and that was the first time I saw a 94-year-old man cry, telling me that story. And it was this is when I started to realize, man, I'm onto something special here. And
Let me just tell you this: Henry Longuevere tells the exact same story. He was in a train full of cow poop, and he called it I don't know, the exact same story. He didn't talk about the POW letters. Maybe that happened separate from him, or maybe his car didn't get released. But he absolutely tells that story where Americans came down, they could hear it, they knew Americans, and then they saw a juicy target of a train and they scraped it. I'm going to have to link you guys, because they likely were nuts to butts in the same damn car, or for sure in the same train. I think that seems likely.
Yeah, if you gotta ask him if he was with the 106th Division, the 106th, they had about the number varies. I've seen it's between 7,000 and 8,000 guys had surrendered. So,
well, he was swept up somewhere else. Like, he got blown up and then ended up in a German POW hospital, basically. Anyhow, we'll talk about that off mic. But how incredible is that they both have the same story? It easily could have been, and that could have happened 100 times on 100 different rail lines. But it's just the stories are too similar,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's remarkable. Are you going to make a book too, since you have so many stories?
It's been thrown out there. And I don't know. I'm thinking about doing a German Mauser and getting the second side of all these stories.
That'd be cool. Scott, what do you think about all of this? I mean, you've helped Andy out in getting this book out. What do you want to see him do next, and what stories stand out to you? Because I know you've been through the book.
Man, that's a great question. I think there's just, with the volume of soldiers and people that fought in this war, there are so many interesting perspectives on both sides. And I think that Andy really drills down on probably the most important part of war is it's the people that fight it, and to be able to hear it from those voices that he illustrates so well in the rifle is something remarkable. And we've all had the same conversation between us about how in pulling history from people, their story, they don't feel comfortable sharing their story, and it takes somebody, a trusted agent, to do that. And Andy's one deficit when you're interviewing a 90-year-old soldier is you have to take into account memory loss, how facts are faded and embellished in some cases. And that's why I'm such a huge advocate of sharing these stories from this war in Iraq and Afghanistan, because why do we need to wait 50 years for those stories to be forgotten and the memories to fade and the people to die? I think it's vital, as not only as veterans, but that small segment of people who we all know are storytellers, and to not be apprehensive or ashamed if you think there's something worth telling. And I told Andy this, and any veteran author that's thinking of writing and sharing stories, like, not everything has to be a book. It could be an article or a blog or something, but find a medium that you're comfortable with, but share that history, man. Write it down and make sure it's not forgotten. Because whether Andy does another book about the Germans or the Pacific side, I think that there's so much content, and he's such an expert. To really get a sense of the work he's done, all any listener has to do his Instagram page at @the_rifle_ and look at the content. Nearly 30,000 followers for a first-time author who doesn't have a book on the shelf yet. There's 30,000 people following Andrew and all of the amazing people that he interviewed. That's phenomenal. And those are real people that are interested in this story. So I can't wait for this book to come out June 1st. And COVID, no COVID, Andy's going to be making himself available too. And I will see him on August 1st. So, Andy, why don't you tell everybody listening right now a little bit about what's going on August 1st, talk about the launch real quick, and then talk about the event on August 1st, where I'll see you up in Boston.
Sure. August 1st, I wish it was sooner. And there would be about 10 more guys coming if they hadn't passed away in the last year. But I'm going to try to reunite everybody from the rifle in one room for my book launch on August 1st at the American Heritage Museum in Hudson, Massachusetts. So Sunday, August 1st, I'm doing a massive book signing. Right now, I have about 30 World War II veterans RSVPing from all different units, all different divisions, all different backgrounds. It's going to be a crazy event. And I absolutely can't wait. I've dreamt of this day for years, and I'm looking forward to it. I really wish there was certain men in my book who could be there to see the finish line. John Katsaros, Lawson Sakai, and Joe Drago, Nelson Bryant, Fred Morgan. Those guys we lost too soon before my book could come out and they could see the finished product.
Yeah. Andy not only dreamed of the day, but as a guy that's been involved with this project, he's called me many times in deep frustration for the length of the process. And, it wasn't much solace to Andy when I tell him, I said, hey, really, brother, the only way you could have prevented this is written this book 5 years earlier, and it wouldn't have been the same book. You just can't stop. You can't stop. You guys were here today, the John Katsaros of the world, and everybody like him that you shared. It's their family and their great grandchildren that'll read this story and know that their grandpa was something special, and someone took time to really care about his story, and you did that. And that's why your book got signed with Regnery, and that's why it's going to be a bestseller once it comes out June 1st. So, I cannot tell everybody listening to this episode enough to please go on Amazon and buy this book. I put my name on this book. I think my name is actually on the book. I wrote a blurb for Andy. And it's just fascinating. I mean, I can't say enough good things about it. And Amazon, click and we'll sign it. I'll make sure of it. We'll get it to him and we'll figure out a way. But man, I'm just excited to be a part of this project, to call you my friend and fellow warrior on the way. It's a tough, grinding journey that you endured, but man, you did some great work, brother, and I'm proud to be a part of it.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you for helping me accomplish this dream and goal, and I'm ready to do more.
Yeah, I love it. Everybody, for sure. You've heard Scott's impassioned and correct, appeal to buy the rifle. There is the link right there. If you get it on Amazon, we'll get a little bit of I think we get a nickel every time we sell a book. So that helps us out. But for sure, get the book. I'll be getting it. What's that?
I have a special nickname for Scott because I used to call him the Major.
Oh, that's right.
Or Major. Then he became my agent, so now I just go straight Major. He is Major Scott.
Agent.
Okay, Scott, you say.
Yeah, and Scott wouldn't be on the book, as an agent unless he believed in it. And I remember when we first talked about it, Scott was like, "Oh my God, this book is so incredible," and I've been excited to get it, to listen to it too. So I can't wait to have it come out. Scott, any words in closing?
Yeah, I tell you, it's you guys know I don't like to advertise the fact that I'm an agent to be lumped in with chasing lawyers, and but I was happy to do it because I believe in telling veteran stories. And when Andy put the work in, one of the proudest days was I was in Dallas or San Antonio. I can't remember. I was at my hotel by the pool, and I picked up the phone and I called Andy and I said, "Hey, congratulations." And he says, "What?" I said, "You're a published author." And it's pretty emotional to come that far and to sell a book in the mainstream publishing world. It's a very, 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 very tight game, because there's millions of people that say, "Oh, I wrote a book," and have it.
And Andy, I have one final question for you. When someone cracks this book, oh, there he goes.
Just remarkable. So, hey, that's it, man. I was just going to give one last call to action for everyone listening to the show. Everybody that's following the rifle, everyone that follows me, go and buy a copy of the book, because your pre-order copy of this book, once this book launches on June 1st, it'll blow up. And buy a copy. There's people listening to the show, they say, "Oh, I'd like to support veterans." Go support a veteran. Buy this great story and share it and give it as a gift, man. And that small contribution, gas, man. Go buy this book. It's going to be amazing, and you won't be disappointed. I love it.
And then one question for you, Andy. When someone does buy this book, what are they getting?
They're getting a lot of things. Sure, they're getting combat stories from some of America's last World War II veterans, but you're also seeing a unique bond between America's youngest veterans and America's oldest veterans, which I think is historic in itself. And yeah.
Perfect. Stand by.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much for watching.